There is a particular silence that descends upon a room when cruelty happens in plain sight. It is not the silence of shock. It is not the silence of confusion. It is something far worse. It is the silence of calculation, the silence of people measuring the cost of intervention against the cost of staying quiet. And on the evening of October 14th, inside the grand ballroom of the Pemberton Hotel in Philadelphia, 400 of the most powerful people on the East Coast made that calculation. They chose quiet. In the center of that ballroom, beneath a chandelier worth more than most homes, a man named Richard Aldridge stood with his arm outstretched, his finger pointed like a weapon at a woman who had nothing but her uniform and her dignity. Her name was Grace Thornton. She was 26 years old. She had worked at the Pemberton for 3 years. And in that moment, with the orchestra frozen mid-note and every champagne glass suspended in mid-air, she was being accused of stealing a diamond worth $4 million. What happens in a room when the most powerful person in it decides to destroy the least powerful? Usually, nothing. Usually, the world simply watches. Usually, we avert our eyes and tell ourselves it is not our business, not our fight, not our place to intervene. But on this particular night, something different happened. A voice spoke, and that voice changed everything. To understand what happened in that ballroom, we need to go back. Not days, not weeks. We need to understand the architecture of the moment, who these people were, what they carried with them, and why one woman's silence and one man's rage would collide so catastrophically in front of witnesses who should have known better. Richard Aldridge was 63 years old. He had built his hotel empire from a single property in Baltimore that he purchased at 29 with money borrowed against his father's life insurance policy. By 40, he owned a dozen hotels. By 50, he owned 40. By 60, he was one of the wealthiest hospitality magnates in the country, with properties in every major American city and 3 on international soil. But wealth was not what defined Richard Aldridge. What defined him was control. Every detail of his hotels passed through his hands. Every menu, every fabric swatch, every employee review. His staff did not simply work for him, they feared him. And not in the abstract sense that people fear powerful men. They feared him specifically. They feared his memory, which was flawless. They feared his standards, which were impossible. And they feared his temper, which could erupt without warning and leave careers in ruins. In the industry, they called him the architect, not because he designed buildings, but because he designed outcomes. Every situation Richard Aldridge entered, he constructed the ending he wanted. He decided who rose, he decided who fell, he decided who mattered, and who disappeared. And on the evening of October 14th, he had decided that Grace Thornton was going to disappear. There is something we need to examine here, something uncomfortable. Why do we grant certain people the authority to destroy others? Richard Aldridge had money. Richard Aldridge had influence. Richard Aldridge had a reputation that preceded him into every room. But none of those things, legally or morally, gave him the right to point his finger at a woman and declare her guilty in front of 400 witnesses. Yet no one questioned it. Not one person in that ballroom said, "Wait, where is the evidence? Why should we believe this accusation? What process should we follow before we condemn someone?" No one asked, because no one thought to ask. Richard Aldridge's authority was so complete, so unquestioned, that his accusation functioned as conviction. His finger was judge, jury, and executioner. And this is the first lesson of this story. The silence of witnesses is not passive. It is active participation. Every person who looked away that night participated in what was happening to Grace Thornton. Their silence was permission. Grace Thornton had not grown up dreaming of cleaning hotel rooms. She had grown up in Norristown, Pennsylvania, 25 miles from the Philadelphia skyline she could see from her childhood bedroom window. Her mother had worked 2 jobs, morning shifts at a hospital cafeteria and evening shifts as a home health aide for elderly patients who could not dress themselves or remember their own children's names. Grace had watched her mother come home exhausted night after night, her feet swollen, her back aching, her spirit somehow unbroken. And somewhere in that watching, Grace had decided what she wanted to be. A nurse. Not because it was glamorous, not because it paid well, but because her mother had spent years caring for people who had no one else, and Grace had seen what that care meant. She had seen dying men grip her mother's hand because they were afraid to let go. She had seen confused women smile when her mother sang to them, some memory of comfort breaking through the fog of their illness. Grace wanted to do that. She wanted to be the person who showed up when everyone else had given up. But nursing school cost money, and scholarships only covered so much. And her mother's health had begun to fail 3 years ago. The same exhaustion that had taken her mother's patience now taking her mother, piece by piece. So Grace had taken the job at the Pemberton. It was not what she wanted, but it was what she needed. The pay was decent. The hours allowed her to attend her classes, and the benefits included health insurance that helped cover her mother's medications. For 3 years, Grace had cleaned rooms. She had changed sheets. She had scrubbed bathrooms and vacuumed carpets and smiled at guests who looked through her like she was furniture. She had done her job with precision and care, not because she loved it, but because she understood something essential about work. Every job is practice for who you are becoming. The way you fold a hospital corner on a hotel bed is the same attention you will bring to a hospital bed someday. The way you treat a stranger's belongings is the same respect you will bring to a patient's dignity. Grace believed this. She lived this. And on the morning of October 14th, she arrived at work carrying the same weight she always carried: her mother's illness, her tuition payment due in 3 weeks, and her exhaustion from studying until 2 in the morning. She did not know that in 12 hours, she would be standing in the middle of a ballroom with a billionaire's finger in her face. She did not know that everything she had worked for was about to be threatened by a lie. If Grace Thornton represented what happens when ordinary people work toward extraordinary goals, then Miranda Vance represented something else entirely. Miranda was 34 years old. She had been Richard Aldridge's fiancée for 18 months, and she was, by every conventional measure, everything a woman in her position should be: beautiful, charming, sophisticated, capable of discussing wine vintages with sommeliers and market projections with investors. What the world did not see, what Richard Aldridge did not see, was the architecture beneath the charm. Miranda had arrived in Richard's life at precisely the right moment. His first wife had died 4 years earlier, leaving him grieving and isolated. His children from that marriage had grown distant, resentful of his workaholic absence during their childhoods. He was, beneath the power and the control, lonely. Miranda had recognized that loneliness immediately. She had studied it. She had positioned herself as its solution, and she had succeeded. Within 6 months, she was living in his penthouse. Within a year, she was wearing his ring. Within 18 months, she had access to accounts, passwords, and the daily rhythms of his empire. What she also had, invisible to everyone, was a problem. Miranda's previous life, the life before Richard, had involved debts, significant debts. The kind of debts that accumulate when someone lives beyond their means for too long, when credit cards stack up, when investments fail, when the lifestyle you are projecting costs 3 times what you actually possess. Miranda had believed that Richard's money would solve these debts, But Richard, despite his generosity, was careful. He did not simply hand her control. He gave her an allowance. A generous allowance, certainly, but not the kind of money that could eliminate $600,000 in accumulated obligations. And the people Miranda owed that money to were not patient people. So Miranda had made a decision. A calculated, cold decision. She would take what she needed. She would take it carefully. She would take it in ways that could not be traced back to her. And if someone else had to be blamed? Well, that was simply the cost of survival. We should pause here, because it would be easy to paint Miranda Vance as a simple villain, a greedy woman exploiting a lonely man, a schemer without conscience or complexity. But that would be too simple. And this story is not about simple. Miranda Vance was desperate, and desperation does not excuse cruelty, but it does explain it. The people she owed money to had made threats, real threats, threats involving physical harm, threats involving exposure that would destroy the life she had constructed. When someone is cornered, they make choices that their better selves would never make. This does not make those choices acceptable, but it makes them human. The tragedy of what was about to happen was not that Miranda was evil. The tragedy was that she was ordinary. An ordinary person with ordinary weaknesses who made a devastating choice because she could not see another way out. Most of the damage done in this world is not done by monsters. It is done by frightened people trying to survive. That does not make the damage less real, but it should make us cautious about how easily we divide the world into heroes and villains. October 14th began like any other morning for Grace. She arrived at the Pemberton at 6:15. She changed into her uniform in the staff locker room. She checked her assignment sheet and noted that she had been assigned to the executive suites on the 12th floor, the floor that would be occupied by VIP guests attending that evening's gala. The gala was Richard Aldridge's obsession. Once a year, he opened the Pemberton's grand ballroom for what he called the Collection Unveiling, an exhibition of rare jewels from his private collection, displayed for one night only, with proceeds from the evening going to charity. It was part philanthropy, part ego, part business networking. The guest list included senators, CEOs, celebrities, and the kind of old money that never needed to announce itself. The centerpiece of this year's collection was a diamond called the Aurora Stone, $4 million, 12 carats, a blue tint so subtle it seemed to shift depending on the light. Grace had seen photographs of it in the staff briefing materials. She had thought, briefly, about how that single stone could pay for her nursing degree 10 times over. Then she had put the thought away and gone back to work. She did not know that by noon, Miranda Vance would ensure that the Aurora Stone crossed her path in the worst possible way. It happened in the library. The Pemberton's library was a private space on the 14th floor, accessible only to penthouse guests, and, occasionally, to Richard Aldridge himself when he needed quiet. Grace was not supposed to be there. Her assignment was the 12th floor. But at 11:45, her supervisor had called her to cover for another maid who had gone home sick. She knocked on the library door. Standard protocol. No answer. She used her master key and entered. And there was Miranda Vance. Miranda was standing at the far end of the room, her back to the door, speaking rapidly into her phone. Grace caught only fragments. Tonight? The handoff? Make sure he's there. Before Miranda heard the door and spun around. For a moment, neither woman moved. Then Miranda's face changed. The surprise dissolved into something colder, something calculating. "What are you doing here?" Miranda asked, not shouting, not panicking. Her voice was perfectly controlled. "I was sent to clean, ma'am," Grace said. "I can come back?" "No." Miranda's eyes swept over Grace's uniform, her face, her name tag. "No, that's fine. I was just finishing a call. Go ahead." Grace moved to the bookshelf and began dusting. Behind her, she could feel Miranda's gaze, measuring her, assessing her. Grace did not understand what she had interrupted. She did not know that Miranda had been coordinating the theft of the Aurora Stone with a business rival of Richard's who had offered to pay twice its value for the humiliation of taking it from under Richard's nose. But Miranda understood something else. Miranda understood that Grace had heard her, and that Grace, if questioned, might remember what she had heard. And that Grace, young, vulnerable, without allies, was the perfect person to blame if anything went wrong. In that moment, standing in the library with the afternoon light cutting through the windows, Miranda decided that Grace Thornton would be her escape route. All she needed was the right moment. By 7 o'clock, the ballroom was transformed. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across tables dressed in white linen. An orchestra played softly in the corner, the kind of classical music that signified wealth and culture without demanding attention. Waiters in crisp uniforms circulated with champagne flutes and canapés that cost more than Grace earned in a day. And in the center of the room, on a raised platform surrounded by velvet rope and armed security, sat the Aurora Stone. Grace was not supposed to be in the ballroom that night. Housekeeping staff were confined to the service corridors and the staging areas, invisible labor keeping the visible world running smoothly. But at 8:15, her supervisor asked her to help distribute table gifts, small crystal paperweights etched with the Pemberton logo. She was carrying a tray of them through the ballroom when she saw Miranda. Miranda was standing near the jewelry display, speaking to Richard. She looked stunning. A black gown, diamond earrings, her hair swept up in a style that suggested effortless elegance. Richard stood beside her, his hand on her back, the possessive gesture of a man who believed he had found his equal. Grace looked away and continued toward the service entrance. She did not see Miranda whisper something in Richard's ear. She did not see Richard's face change. She did not see them both turn to look at her. At 9:30, the theft was discovered. Or rather, the theft was announced. Richard Aldridge took the microphone on the stage and asked for the room's attention. His voice was calm, but there was something beneath it, a tremor of controlled rage that everyone in the room recognized. "I regret to inform you," he said, "that one of the pieces from tonight's collection has been stolen. The Aurora Stone is missing from its case." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Then silence. "We have reason to believe," Richard continued, "that the theft was committed by a member of my own staff." His eyes found Grace across the room. "And I intend to address this matter immediately." What happened next was not a conversation. It was not an interrogation. It was theater. Richard crossed the ballroom floor with the crowd parting before him. He stopped 3 feet from Grace Thornton, who stood frozen with her serving tray still in her hands. "Give me the stone," he said. Grace stared at him. "Sir, I don't know what you're talking about." "You were seen." His voice rose. The orchestra had stopped, every eye in the room fixed on them. "You were seen taking it from the case. My fiancée saw you. Security footage will confirm it. Now give me the stone before I have you arrested." "I didn't take anything." Grace's voice was steady, but her hands trembled. The paperweights on her tray clinked against each other. "Sir, I promise you, I haven't been near the display case. I was distributing gifts, that's all." "Empty your pockets." The command hung in the air. "Sir." "Empty your Pockets. Grace set down the tray. She turned out her pockets. A tissue, a pen, a prayer card her mother had given her for luck. Nothing else. Richard stared at the meager contents. Then his face twisted. Search her. 2 security guards stepped forward. A female guard patted Grace down while 400 people watched. The search found nothing. But Richard was not satisfied. Richard was never wrong. Richard had built an empire on the certainty that his instincts were flawless. You hid it somewhere, he said. Where? Your locker? Your car? Tell me now, and I might let you walk out of here without handcuffs. I didn't take anything. Grace's voice cracked, but she did not cry. I would never. I need this job. I need it for school. I need it for my mother. I would never risk everything I'm working for to steal from you. Everyone says that. Richard's voice dripped with contempt. Everyone who gets caught says they had reasons. You think your reasons make you special? You think because you're paying for school, you're entitled to my property? I didn't take it. Then explain why my fiancé saw you at the display case at 8:45. I was never at the display case. Richard turned to Miranda, who stood a few feet away with an expression of wounded concern. Tell them what you saw, darling. Miranda stepped forward. She looked at Grace with something that might have been pity if it weren't so calculated. I saw her, Richard. I was coming from the restroom and I saw her reach into the case. I wasn't sure what I had seen at first, so I didn't say anything. But when you announced the theft, I knew I had to speak up. Grace stared at Miranda. And in that stare was the beginning of understanding. The library, the phone call, the way Miranda had looked at her afterward, measuring, calculating. She's lying. The words came out before Grace could stop them. Richard's face went red. What did you say? She's lying. I wasn't at the display case. I was distributing gifts on the other side of the room. There are witnesses. There are security cameras. If you check, you're calling my fiancé a liar? I'm telling you the truth. Richard stepped closer. So close Grace could smell his cologne, could see the veins pulsing in his temple. You are nothing, he said. His voice was quiet now, which was worse than the shouting. You are a maid. You clean toilets. You change sheets. And you think you can stand here and call my fiancé a liar in front of everyone I know? Grace said nothing. I will ruin you. Richard's finger came up, pointing directly at her face. Not just fired, ruined. I will make sure you never work in this city again. I will make sure every employer knows what you are, a thief, a liar, a nobody who thought she could take from me and get away with it. This is where we need to stop and ask the question that should have been asked in that ballroom. Why did no one intervene? 400 people, senators, CEOs, judges, doctors, the supposed elite of society. Every one of them watched a powerful man threaten to destroy a young woman's life based on the word of his fiancé. And no one said a word. Is it fear? Is it self-interest? Is it the simple human instinct to stay out of conflict that does not directly involve us? Or is it something darker? Something that happens when we divide the world into people who matter and people who don't. Grace Thornton was a maid. Her uniform marked her as staff. Her position marked her as expendable. And when someone expendable is attacked by someone important, we tell ourselves it is not our place to intervene. We tell ourselves there must be a reason. We tell ourselves that surely, if she were innocent, she would be able to prove it. We tell ourselves these things because the alternative, standing up, speaking out, risking our own position to defend someone without power, is uncomfortable. It is costly. It requires us to believe that someone's humanity matters more than their utility. And on the night of October 14th, 400 people decided that Grace Thornton's humanity was not worth the cost. Richard Aldridge's finger was still in Grace's face when the voice spoke. It came from behind him, from the shadows near the service entrance. A voice like gravel and iron, unhurried and unafraid. "That's enough, Richard." The room shifted. Richard turned. Standing at the edge of the ballroom was a man most of the guests had never seen. He was in his early 60s, tall and lean, with a face that looked like it had been carved from old wood. His left cheek bore a scar that ran from temple to jaw, a souvenir, according to Pemberton legend, from his years in military intelligence before he had come to work for Richard. His name was Marcus Webb. He was the Pemberton's head of security, and in 22 years of service, he had never once publicly contradicted his employer. Until now. "Marcus?" Richard's voice was dangerous. "This does not concern you." "It concerns me if you're about to make a mistake you can't take back." "A mistake? My fiancée witnessed. I know what your fiancée claims." Marcus walked forward, his footsteps echoing in the silent room. "But before you destroy this woman's life, you might want to see what the security cameras actually captured." Miranda's face went pale. Richard stared at his security chief. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that I've been watching the feeds all night." Marcus pulled a tablet from inside his jacket. "And I'm talking about the fact that Miss Thornton was nowhere near the display case at 8:45, but someone else was." He tapped the tablet screen. And on the massive projection screen behind the stage, the screen that had been showing images of the jewelry collection all evening, a new image appeared. Security footage. Time-stamped 8:47 p.m., the display case, the velvet rope, and a woman in a black gown reaching inside, lifting the Aurora Stone and slipping it into her evening bag. Miranda Vance. The ballroom erupted, not in shouts, not in chaos, but in the particular murmur of the wealthy confronting scandal, hushed voices, darting glances, the sound of smartphones being silenced as everyone realized they were witnessing something they would be discussing for years. Richard Aldridge stood frozen, his arm still half raised, his face cycling through emotions faster than he could process them. Disbelief, recognition, horror. "That's not..." Miranda's voice cut through the murmur. "That footage is doctored. It's manipulated. Richard, you can't believe..." "Be quiet." Richard's voice was barely a whisper. "Richard, please. This man has always resented me. He's been waiting for an opportunity to..." "I said be quiet." Marcus Webb advanced toward the projection screen, his tablet still linked to the display. "There's more," he said. His voice carried no satisfaction, no triumph, only the flat professionalism of a man presenting facts. He tapped the screen again. New footage. A corridor on the 14th floor. Time-stamped 8:52 p.m. Miranda Vance walking quickly towards the service elevator. And walking beside her, accepting something she pressed into his hand, was a man in an expensive gray suit. "Julian Hartley," someone in the crowd said. The name rippled through the room. Julian Hartley, CEO of Hartley Hospitality Group, Richard Aldridge's primary competitor. The man who had been trying to acquire Aldridge properties for a decade. He was standing in the crowd now, his face ashen, already moving toward the exit. "Security," Marcus said calmly. "Please detain Mr. Hartley." 2 guards intercepted him before he reached the door. What happens when the architecture of deception collapses? Miranda Vance had constructed her life from careful facades. Every smile calculated, every relationship leveraged, every debt hidden behind walls of charm and misdirection. Now those walls were falling. "This is a setup," she said, her voice rising. "Richard, You have to believe me. This man," she pointed at Marcus, "has been embezzling from the hotel for years. I found out about it. This is his revenge." Richard did not respond. He was staring at the frozen image on the screen. His fiancée, her hand inside the display case, her face caught in the act of betrayal. "Check his accounts," Miranda's voice cracked. "Check his history. He's been stealing from you, and when I discovered it, he decided to frame me." "Miss Vance," Marcus's voice remained steady. "If you would like, we can discuss the last 18 months of wire transfers from dummy corporations to your personal accounts. We can discuss the gambling debts. We can discuss the creditors who have been threatening you, or we can wait for the police to discuss it for us." Miranda's face went white. "I did what I had to do." Her voice had changed. The Polish was gone. Something raw and desperate had replaced it. "You don't understand what it's like. The pressure, the expectations, always having to be perfect, always having to perform, always having to—" "You stole from him," Marcus interrupted. "You framed an innocent woman, and you did it without hesitation." "She's nobody! She's a maid!" The words burst out before Miranda could stop them. "She cleans rooms. Her life isn't— It's not like—" She stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. And here is the moment we need to hold. "She's nobody. She's a maid." This is what Miranda believed. Not just said, believed. She believed that Grace Thornton's life was worth less than her own. She believed that destroying an innocent woman was acceptable because that woman lacked power, lacked status, lacked the social standing that Miranda had spent her life accumulating. This belief is not unique to Miranda Vance. It exists in boardrooms and courtrooms and living rooms. It exists in the calculations we make about who deserves our concern and who can be sacrificed. It exists every time we look at someone's position instead of their humanity and decide they matter less. What Miranda said out loud, 400 people in that ballroom had been thinking. They had looked at Grace in her uniform and decided she was expendable. They had watched Richard humiliate her and decided it was not their place to intervene. Miranda's words were ugly, but they were also honest. And in that honesty was an indictment of everyone in that room, including, perhaps, ourselves. Through all of this, the revelation, the collapse, the desperate accusations, Grace Thornton had remained silent. She had watched the footage play. She had seen Miranda unmasked. She had heard the woman who tried to destroy her reveal exactly what she thought of her. And now, for the first time since the confrontation began, she spoke. "I found it." The room turned to her. "The diamond. I found it. At 8:30, when I was passing through the east corridor. It was on the floor near the service entrance. Someone must have dropped it." She reached into her apron, not her pockets, which had been searched, but the small utility pocket on the inside of the garment where she kept her work notes. "I turned it into Lost and found 20 minutes ago. It's logged, time-stamped. I didn't know what it was. I just knew it didn't belong on the floor." She held up a receipt. A pink carbon copy from the Pemberton's Lost and Found department. "I didn't steal from you, Mr. Aldridge. I found something valuable, and I turned it in. That's what honest people do." There is something profound in this moment. Grace Thornton had every reason to feel vindicated. She had been publicly humiliated. She had been called a thief. She had been threatened with destruction by one of the most powerful men on the East Coast. And yet, when she finally spoke, she did not speak in anger. She did not speak in triumph. She spoke in simple, quiet truth. That's what honest people do. This is the distinction between justice and revenge. Justice is the restoration of truth. Revenge is the infliction of pain. Grace could have raged. Grace could have demanded apologies and compensation and public humiliation in return. Instead, she stated facts. She offered proof. She let her integrity speak louder than any accusation. There is a kind of strength in this that transcends the moment. It is the strength of someone who knows exactly who they are, who has built their character not from position or wealth, but from the daily choices that define a person. Grace Thornton cleaned rooms for a living. But on that night, she demonstrated a moral clarity that shamed everyone in that ballroom. The police arrived at 10:47 p.m. Miranda Vance was arrested for grand theft, conspiracy, and fraud. Julian Hartley was arrested as an accessory. The Aurora Stone was recovered from the Pembertons' lost and found, exactly where Grace had logged it. The ballroom emptied slowly. Guests filed out in silence, avoiding each other's eyes, suddenly aware that they had been witnesses not just to a theft, but to a failure. Their own failure to speak, to question, to demand that power be accountable. And in the center of that emptying room, Richard Aldridge stood alone. He had not moved since the footage played. His empire, his judgment, his very identity as a man who controlled outcomes. All of it had been shattered in minutes. He looked at Grace Thornton. "Miss Thornton?" She turned. He stopped, swallowed, started again. "I owe you an apology." "Yes," Grace said, "you do. I accused you without evidence. I threatened you in front of witnesses. I allowed my trust in the wrong person to blind me to... You believed I was guilty because I was poor." Grace's voice was steady. "You believed her because she was beautiful and charming and wore the right clothes. You didn't need evidence because you had already decided what kind of person I was." Richard said nothing. There was nothing to say. "Your apology doesn't fix what happened tonight. 400 people watched you tear me apart. 400 people will remember my name as the maid who was accused of theft at the Pemberton Gala. Your apology doesn't change that." "Then tell me what will." Grace considered this. For a long moment, she simply looked at the man who had nearly destroyed her. "I don't want your money," she said finally. "I don't want a payout to keep quiet, or a check to make this go away. What I want is for you to remember this night. I want you to remember what you almost did. And I want you to ask yourself, every time you look at someone in a uniform, whether you're seeing them as a person or as furniture." She picked up her serving tray. "I'll finish my shift, Mr. Aldridge. Someone needs to clean up this mess." She walked away. 3 days after the gala, Richard Aldridge held a press conference. He did not minimize what had happened. He did not spin it, or deflect it, or blame it on the woman who had deceived him. He stood at a podium in the Pemberton's lobby and told the truth. He had accused an innocent woman. He had humiliated her in public. He had been blinded by his own certainty and his own biases, and he had nearly destroyed a life. "Grace Thornton deserved better from me," he said. "She deserved better from everyone in that room, and while I cannot undo what happened, I can commit to doing better." He announced the creation of a scholarship fund in Grace's name. He announced new policies requiring independent investigation before any employee could be publicly accused of misconduct. He announced that Marcus Webb, who had risked his own career to tell the truth, would be promoted to Vice President of Operations. And then, in a moment that would be replayed on news broadcasts for weeks, he did something no one expected. He bowed. Not a small nod of acknowledgement. A full, formal bow, the gesture of a man who understood that he had failed and was asking, publicly, for the chance to prove he could be better. Grace Thornton did not attend the press conference. She was in class, studying for a pharmacology exam. When reporters found her afterward, she answered their questions briefly and without drama. "Mr. Aldridge apologized. I accepted his apology. Now I need to get back to my life." She did not take the scholarship. She told Richard that she preferred to earn her own way, and that accepting his money would feel like being paid for her suffering. But she did accept one thing: a letter of recommendation. Detailed, glowing, acknowledging both her work ethic and her character, signed by Richard Aldridge himself. "Not because I deserve his praise," she told a reporter, "but because I earned it." What do we take from this story? Perhaps we take the reminder that power without accountability is tyranny, that the ability to destroy someone's life is not the same as the right to do so. Perhaps we take the warning that bias blinds us, that we judge people by their positions rather than their characters, and that this judgment causes real harm to real people every day. Perhaps we take the lesson that silence is complicity, that when we watch injustice happen and say nothing, we are not neutral observers, we are participants in the injustice. But perhaps most importantly, we take this: one voice spoke. In a room full of powerful people who had every reason to stay quiet, one man, Marcus Webb, decided that the truth mattered more than his comfort. He decided that Grace Thornton's innocence was worth more than his relationship with his employer. He decided that doing right was more important than doing easy. And because of that decision, everything changed. We will all find ourselves in rooms like that ballroom. Maybe not as dramatic, maybe not as public, but we will all witness moments when someone is being treated unjustly, when power is being abused, when the right thing to do is also the hard thing to do. In those moments, we have a choice. We can look away, or we can be the voice that speaks. This was the story of a maid, a billionaire, and a truth that could not be silenced. A story about the danger of assumption, about the price of silence, about the power of one voice to change the course of events. Grace Thornton graduated from nursing school 14 months later. She now works in the emergency department at Jefferson Hospital in Philadelphia, where she spends her nights caring for people who have no one else. She still thinks about that night sometimes. The chandelier, the silence, the finger pointed at her face. But mostly she thinks about Marcus Webb, the man who spoke when everyone else stayed silent. "He reminded me," she said once, "that there are still people who choose courage over comfort. And that's worth remembering, especially on the hard days." If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. And remember, the next time you see someone being treated unjustly, you have the power to be the voice that speaks. Thank you for listening.